Hey everyone, thank you for joining the Veeam and ESG webinar today on World Backup Day. Today's topic is the top 3 things to focus on in backup for 2020. Our speakers today are Dave Russell from Veeam, VP of Enterprise Strategy, and Christoph Bertrand, ESG Senior Analyst. So a few housekeeping things. Upon entry, you are automatically muted, so you won't be able to speak, but we have a chat function. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat function and we'll get back to you. And we will post this recording and the presentation following, so we'll send out a link so that you have access to it. So to go ahead and jump right in, I'll pass it over to Christoph.
Thank you and happy World Backup Day. Let's get started. I have a bunch of data I want to share with you, and I'm going to be engaging in a conversation with Dave. Hey Dave, how you doing?
Hey, very good, Christoph. Hope you're doing well this fine 2020 World Backup Day.
Absolutely, and what a different world it is. Things have changed, but you know, data still has to be protected. It's still a data-centric world, and more than ever, I think we can say that. So I just wanted to share some data points with all of you today. Some of them are broader in terms of scope, talking about the bigger picture, and then we'll zoom in on specifics that cover the backup space. So first of all, the data. Future is data-centric. We've asked a number of IT professionals as part of our IT research that we do every year for spending intentions. So this is one for 2020. And specifically, we wanted to know, hey, what are you doing with the data and how critical is it to your business? As you can see, it's pretty obvious that data not only helps support the business, but in many cases, data is the business, and we all know that. Think about all of the products that you buy and the websites you go to, all the services you buy that are associated with physical products. And in some cases, it's pure data. So the point here is that data is everything, and it's going to be even more important moving forward. So when we looked at those that really have leveraged data here on the left-hand side to support a tangible offering or provide information related type of services, you could see that they have a large majority has plans to develop even more offerings. So I think it sort of nets it out here. There is no question that we're going to see more data. Data is critical to the business. Data is an asset. And therefore, when you have an asset, well, you have to maximize the return on that asset, but more importantly, you have to protect it. So Dave, is that something that you hear from your customers on your end?
Yeah, it certainly is, Christoph. I mean, if you think about it, data is often fueling most organizations' digital transformation efforts. And I say effort or a continuum of activity because digital transformation isn't just one thing, and it certainly isn't the same thing for every business. But there is commonality that you need good data, an abundance of it, very reliable, high quality data points in order to make those kinds of decisions and business transformations.
Absolutely, and digital transformation is something that is evolving, and we also track it, and more organizations are going through it. And of course, there are some hurdles. One of the things we also identified in terms of the big issues that are out there, and really the elephant in the room is ransomware. And we asked a very upfront question about the type of attacks and how many attacks people have experienced. And as you can see, it's a pretty common occurrence for many organizations. So what I think I want to do here is not really tell you, okay, it's going to be really awful with ransomware. You already know that. I think the more interesting thing is, what can you do about it? How can you solve this issue? And I was very interested, Dave, in some of the recent solutions and developments that I've seen from Veeam on the topic, and you have some great ways of not only providing the remediation part of it, but also being more proactive through some of the sandboxing, to use a very advanced technology term here, that you can provide.
Yeah, thank you, Christoph. What I think is important on this slide is optically your eye might gravitate towards 38%, but really what you have to do is you have to aggregate the other 60%, everything over to the left-hand side of that 38% and the 2% that say that they're not sure. So 60%, and I think you and I might assert that the other 40% could perhaps be mistaken, or perhaps they're just the lucky few, but they may not be that lucky going forward. So this is highly pervasive. And when you mention, what can we do at Veeam? Well, we think about it in multiple ways. One is ensuring that you have a proper backup in the first place. So we have automated testing technology called Sure Backup. As the name might imply, it self-tests or validates that what you've preserved is indeed correct. Now, going forward, we've got a few other things. I'll just mention a couple of them. One of them is a technology we released most recently in version 10, and it's an immutability feature that currently leverages AWS S3 object block to ensure that as backups are moved off to the cloud, that they are made immutable from anyone, meaning even AWS employees, any internal bad actor within your own organization. If I was the administrator, I couldn't alter or delete backups before a prescribed schedule. So you've got that known safety point. I'll just mention a third technology on the other end of this. If the bad day happens, right, that you suspect ransomware has infiltrated your environment, we have a technology that leverages something we call data labs, but it's just a way to mount now many machine instances and to optionally do that in a fenced off area. I mean, it's not networked into production environment. It is isolated, and you can run the virus scanner of your choice to ensure that you're not bringing back data from perhaps weeks ago that might still have a latent threat in it. So there's a few different ways we want to be able to get ahead of the curve, be able to secure you, or be able to remediate if something happens.
Yeah, and Dave, one of the things that I want to point out too here is the problem is cyber skills. You have to have these great tools that automate and simplify the ability to fight off ransomware, be more proactive, simply because there are not enough cyber skill sets out there. And that's really a problem. That shortage really makes the IT complexity problem and a series of domino effects, if you will, just more prominent. So one of the things that we looked at also is, and we look at every year, is why is IT becoming more complex? And again, remember, we're thinking about what are the top 3 things here for backup day? Well, obviously protecting and having a strategy against ransomware is one, but let's take a look at the broader picture. Of course, cyber is a big issue that increases complexity, direct impact on the ability to react. Number 2, compliance, the privacy regulations and that we've seen come up, CCPA in California, GDPR in Europe, and really around the world, but also the fact that there are so many new devices. And as you can see, this was done last year. I'm sure we'll get a very different number, and we'll get a different number this year, the increase in remote mobile workers. So it's important to have a sort of a total view of the problem here to really understand how to address ransomware. I don't know if anything calls your attention here, Dave, but I think there's here a ton of information that really describes the world that the IT professionals we try to help live in today.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I had to think of one takeaway from this slide, which I love, by the way, I think this is brilliant because it really highlights that the entire landscape that the IT community is operating in is changing, meaning the number of devices, the location of those devices, what kind of applications, the world that you live in from a threat potential, the skills required to keep up with all these activities, and never mind the fact that we're replatforming systems, we're trying to embrace DevOps and other kinds of activities. So the long story short is the old triage of sort of build, run, transform the business. Build and run is getting increasingly more difficult.
Absolutely. And let's take a quick look here at what's really going on in terms of skill shortages beyond cybersecurity, which is a top one. Because why do we talk about skills? Let me simplify it, because I've had the pleasure of working also on the vendor side in product leadership type of positions. And one thing that has become very obvious in the past few years is there's a lot of complexity. There are many processes that have to be simplified and ease of use, and building that into the solution and maybe injecting some machine learning and some AI. Those are all important things, because look at the variety of skill set shortages that we see out there. And by the way, as I'm looking at the list, I can see that a lot of them truly affect the ability to protect the environment. Data protection, backup and recovery, actually is number 6, I believe, on the list or something like that. So, but looking at all of these, what I'm thinking about here is, look, if I'm a decision maker in IT, I'm going to have to now invest in solutions that not only improve my operational efficiency, but really help me alleviate this issue of skill sets that is pretty pervasive across the board. So I look at the breadth of the platform that you guys deliver, and I see that you're answering a bunch of areas right here.
Yeah, I agree with you that, the notion of data protection or availability overall is part and parcel or tightly intertwined with the rest of these activities above and below it. So from a security perspective, automation, orchestration, certainly being hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, last 2 comments I'd quickly make on this is you could look and say, but data protection is kind of in the middle of this list. That's one way to view it, that maybe it's not really very high on the list. The other is, in my mind, I say, well, data protection has been around for roughly 6 decades. No exaggeration, 60 rough odd years. And yet it's still in the top 10 of challenges because of all of these activities that we've mentioned or change that we've mentioned. So really what, in my mind, you need to be able to try to come to terms with this as an organization is a platform that can extend to be able to handle multiple workloads, multiple environments, but potentially also coexist very nicely with multiple parts of the business.
And also look at this list, everything is intertwined.
Yes.
When you talk about IT orchestration, well, of course, BCDR and disaster recovery processes are going to be part of that. Cloud architecture and planning. Have we talked about cloud and backup and recovery yet? Well, we will in a minute, but you know where I'm going with this, I think, clearly. And to your point, 60 years, still in the top 10. And by the way, people could answer multiple questions. So I look at this as a fantastic opportunity for those of you involved in data protection, backup and recovery, and disaster recovery to really help across the board and integrate across the board and alleviate this skill set issue by having and picking the right solutions. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about here, because now we have a top of the list, which is a very important one. I have to tell you, when we got the results back, I knew we would see backup and recovery do really well in terms of investment priorities. But for the reason that I've just explained before, this sort of intertwined, interconnected discipline that it represents, improving data backup and recovery is the top data center modernization investment priority for 2020. I think it says it all, and it is not just by a couple of points. And again, here multiple answers were allowed, but then the point is that this is the clear winner, and it's kind of interesting to see how things have evolved in the past few years. I'm very pleased to see this. Obviously, that's an area I care a lot about. But looking at the other areas as well, I want to make sure I also highlight that this is part of an ecosystem. So when you're talking about deploying hyperconverged infrastructure, you may want to look at solutions that play nice in those environments as well. Having capabilities, even in the backup and recovery solution, that will leverage AI/ML because it's important. For those who decide to go as a software-defined data center sort of strategy, which of course is happening more and more, and will probably happen even more now, you could see that all of those choices will come into play. And here we're talking about investment priorities. So that's where some of your peers, some of you watching us today, are putting their money. Dave, is that something that surprised you?
No, I think it really, if you think about sort of the Laszlo, hierarchy or pyramid of needs, right? You've got to first make sure data is protected. And I always like to say that at the point you go back to your backup copy or your replicas of data, you're doing so most likely with the belief that it's not another version of your data. It is your reliable version of your data because you've either lost confidence in your primary version of data. So it's interesting that this made it to the top of the list, and to your point, Christoph, by a pretty good margin, right? It's not tied for number 2 or something like that. It's a pretty good separation here. But I think what this really says is that because of complexity that we've mentioned in the environments and workloads and where data lives, and that's just speaking about today, never mind where organizations would like to go in the future, that really just trying to keep data safe available is something that organizations struggle with. And my thesis on this, I'd be curious to get your perspective on this. It's not that the data center professionals, but particularly the backup and recovery professionals woke up one day and said, my goodness, I suddenly see that I've got a problem now. No, it's much far more likely is they've seen a challenge coming for potentially a number of years. And what they've tried to do is surface up to the organization, we need new capabilities, or we need to refresh our infrastructure associated with recovery, or whatever the case may be, right? But this was deferred down the road a bit, sort of kick the can down the road, and now it's really hit critical mass. And the last thing I'd say, and then I'd be curious on your thoughts, is, all the survey work, which is fantastic, was done in a pre-COVID-19 landscape or world. And my concern is that organizations are going to find themselves even more challenged than what this data may indicate, because of a variety of cost issues or constraints on supply chain or whatever the case may be. They've now faced an even greater headwind or challenge than all of the things that we've spoken about thus far.
No, you're correct, and I think there'll be winners and losers in terms of technologies. There will be challenges for sure, but I think the important point is that there will be solutions that IT professionals can help lead. As a matter of fact, the fact that all of us have, including my kids, from home, have switched to online remote work. Well, I was doing that already, so it's not big news for me, but for others it is. And somehow we're making it happen. The infrastructure is supporting that, and of course it's harder to go into a data center now to go fix the hardware, and maybe in time it will be something that happens less and less. I do expect we'll see more lights out operations, or fully packaged data centers, for example, where you never go fix anything. There's enough redundancy, and at some point, a few years down the road, you just get a new one, right? Some of these things will happen for sure, but you're right. I think there will be more challenges for IT. I think IT is taking them really head on right now. And I do believe that as we look at this picture, there is no question that more than ever, protecting the data assets, whether you're talking about it from a cyber perspective, and of course from the backup and recovery standpoint, and the ability to reuse the data for intelligent data management, all of these are only going to accelerate. And we've already seen the power of the capabilities we have today in our world. So I think we can do better. There will be challenges, but we're also in. I would like to give a very positive message. I think there's very good things happening already. And I loved your theory of Maslow. Maybe we'll have a webcast on the self-actualization of backup and recovery at some point, Dave.
Nice.
So, by the way, a quick thing. There's always something we talk about with cloud. Here, there's a consumption model. I don't want to go into that too much, but some organizations that are cloud first, organizations that don't really have a traditional data center approach, maybe have been in business typically for less than 10 years, are very likely to also consume the technology in a different way. So it's just something I wanted to put out there, because as you think about, as an IT professional, some of the big changes that may happen, there will be some changes in terms of how you present the infrastructure back to the various organizations within your business that you work with. So it's something to bear in mind, and something that the solution you purchase should have baked in. So we talked about, this is my segue into cloud. Obviously, cloud data protection services has become mainstream for backup and recovery. As you can see, this is very recent data. Cloud backup as a target is sort of the more traditional, if not historically, one of the first use cases for cloud in many ways. And what we can see is that cloud backup target is definitely out there as a standard mode of operation. I think there will be changes, obviously, in the future. Yeah, you have many other ways. You can also leverage backup as a service, and I expect to see more of that actually in the current context we're in, just because for all the reasons we've identified, and for the fact that it's becoming harder to maybe manage in person. Also, disaster recovery as a service is doing really well and picking up. So let me put this in perspective, and this is the data is from 2019. So just last year, we will run this again, if not this year, next year, and we'll get more historicals. But as you can see, the use of cloud in multiple delivery modes or modalities, if you will, has exploded for backup and recovery or disaster recovery. I think it's very obvious from the numbers you see here. The darker blue shows you where we were just a few months ago, and the lighter blue bar shows you where we were 3 years ago, 4 years ago now. And that's an amazing acceleration. As a matter of fact, I haven't seen a lot of markets in IT do that. Very few markets have done that. Maybe cloud has done that. And here again, it's cloud. So I don't know what you think, Dave, but I know you guys have spent a lot of IP, are spending a lot of energy in IP, and have some great roadmaps around cloud. So what are your thoughts on this data?
Yeah, I'm really keen on this chart because it says, for one thing, that cloud is not a single item or concept, right? The cloud can be embraced as a deployment model or as an area to store data in many different fashions, many different ways. And at the end of the day, we speak about backup and recovery or replication failover, but it's data capture, data management, and data movement, and for a variety of purposes, for restore, for failover, for data reuse or leverage, any number of different things. But to me, what this says is amazingly quickly, to your point, from in a 3-year span to oftentimes double the adoption. And if you think about what we're talking about a historically risk-averse area of availability, because this is the last line of the defense, right? This is an area where people aren't quick to introduce new technologies or make a bet, make a gamble, if you will. So you look at all of that, and directionally, it's pretty loud and clear where the market's going. I think we're going to see this even accelerate. So to me, this means a couple things. It means that you've got to think about a cloud capability or capabilities in a very holistic fashion. You've got to think about this in terms of really data movement and data orchestration for a variety of reasons. And then lastly, to my mind, this begets the notion of data portability, that you've got to have a platform that ensures it's not hardwired or some way limiting where data can reside or where data is best optimized.
Exactly, and what a great opportunity for your channel partners, your partners in distribution. I think this is a great opportunity for them to go help many end users as well. So, cloud raised that sort of top 3 points, right? We talked about cyber and really ransomware and thinking through that, leveraging the tools. We talked about ease of use because of complexity. We talked about now cloud and having a holistic cloud strategy. So it turns out that talking about cloud, we have a couple more data points on this because it's so important. This is where it's going, right? And the cloud destinations that are preferred for offsite backup data. As you can see, leveraging a public cloud provider is really important. But as I was talking about partners, I'm thinking, hey, what about those regional MSPs? They're great. And they're sort of getting their share of the action here as well. So a few years ago, when you and I were conversing, Dave, when I was on the vendor side and looking at very high-end secondary replicated data centers, you would have seen a disk-managed system that share be probably, 80% of the market, I would bet, and now it's only a quarter. So great news for MSPs and service providers or organizations that want to become more involved in service provision, which I know Veeam has a fantastic program to do that and help them do that. And of course, destination towards the public hyperscale players, and you know the names, I'm not going to go through them. So this is the lay of the land right now. This, I think, will change very quickly. It probably changes every 6 months. We will run this again in the next year or so and see where we're at. But I'd be curious to see your prediction on this, Dave.
Yeah, a couple of things jump out to me on this one. One is there's nothing that is the clear-cut winner, meaning there's nothing that's 60% the answer, at least today. So this tends to suggest that for a vast majority of organizations, multiple approaches here on the pie chart could be very appropriate. There's no best answer. There's a best fit based upon that specific organization's needs today. And obviously those could change going forward in the future. But I think you're absolutely right on the service perspective or partner perspective. One of the thoughts that we've got is This could be analogous as current time in 2020 with what we found ourselves in 2018 2008 with macroeconomic conditions such that people had to slow down their spend and they needed help externally. And that's where partners have a great role to play in being able to help the business continue to move forward on their plans. But it also, interestingly enough, tape doesn't go away, doesn't go to zero. It still has a role to play for some. Certainly regional players and the ability for them to customize offering or to have a greater sort of a concierge-like touch and customizable capability will be important, as well as everything else on here about on and off site at the location or hyperscalers. So I just like the continuing theme here that cloud is not one thing. It's multiple capabilities, it's multiple deployment models.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that sort of wrap this up that maybe we should highlight is, look, more, especially right now, more and more users are leveraging SaaS applications. And of course, Office 365 is a big tool that is used by remote workers, and maybe it was not used as much before. I know it's been very pervasive, but I think we're now seeing it fully at scale. However, there has been a bit of a disconnect where I think many organizations may have thought that the actual backup was provided by the provider or the SaaS vendor. That's not always the case, actually is probably never really the case. You still are responsible for your data, whatever it is, whether it's in a CRM system or Exchange or 365 data, right? You are still responsible for your data. So you have the responsibility to back it up. Now, how you do it, of course, will be different from what you would do to back up Exchange or SharePoint in your data center. And there are definitely some great tools that Veeam can help you with. But I just want to point that out because that's a big disconnect. By the way, when people say that they rely on the tools provided by the vendor, I'm going to take this one with a grain of salt. I think the reality is that they don't really understand the actual RPOs and RTOs and really what's behind what is provided as an SLA, which is data we've got from the same research here, which we're not showing here, but I can tell you, understanding your SLA for your backup and recovery or your responsibility for backup and recovery for SaaS applications, especially 365, super important, even more so now.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. In fact, that 54% that are saying they're relying on inbuilt capability, that inbuilt capability is essentially a glorified, delete box. It's the trash can, in other words. And so it is only providing a modicum of safety. So to your point exactly, know what your requirements are in terms of your SLAs. It's trust but verify. Don't assume that all is going to be well just because you've moved to a SaaS-based model. It's still your data.
Absolutely. Well, so I think we're at the end of our time here. Dave, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. And I think, thinking about those top 3, and maybe there were 10 that we discussed actually, but we really highlighted the quest to alleviate ransomware and work with the cybersecurity teams to help them, the ease of use that's needed because of the complexity in IT that we see, having a solution that does that, and of course, cloud and cloud strategies, super critical for data protection.
Thank you so much, Christophe. Always a pleasure to visit with you.
Thank you, everyone.